Good morning, everybody. Welcome to what is the 15th episode of HawkBlogger Mornings. I am Brian Emhauser, and it's the start of the week. It is a Monday morning. It is a celestial event morning. So for those people that are obsessed with eclipses and suns and all that kind of moon stuff, happy Monday for you. I personally will probably be driving during that and not even paying that much attention, but to each their own. But for me, and maybe for my guest, I don't know. For me, this Monday is significant because Seahawks are reporting for a voluntary workout start today. They get a little bit of an early start with their new coach, Mike McDonald. And also, the other reason this is a special Monday morning is our guest, ESPN's own Brady Henderson. Welcome to the show. It's been fun to listen to you, follow you, talk to you over the years, and great to start this Monday with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So a special coffee mug for a special occasion. So let me try to get this in the shot.
Hey.
So this is a New Jersey, New York coffee mug. This was gifted to the reporters who covered Super Bowl 48 in New York. So I figured for the HawkBlogger Mornings podcast appearance, we break out the Super Bowl 48 coffee mug.
I love it. I love it. Does the coffee taste any different from that? Like a little more celebratory than normal?
Well, it tastes like New York water, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, not so great. Well, before we jump in with Brady, I do want to welcome Lawrence Richardson, our newest member on YouTube. We're pushing up towards 100 folks that have joined in the last few weeks, which is awesome. You can join. The link is in the chat. It's pinned there. You can also join. The link is in the description of the video. And by doing that, you get this little emblem, as you can see next to Lawrence's name, that highlights you in comments, both in the YouTube channel as well as in the chat, makes it more likely that we are going to reach out, prioritize responding to you. And also, depending on what level you pick, you also are able to get some private AMA things that we're working on and able to do with just suite level members. So a great time to join and do that as we're planning our first one of those. And if you haven't already, patreon.com/HawkBlogger is where you join to get access to all the audio versions of this podcast. So that is definitely something you're going to want to do in addition to getting access to the Slack channel where hundreds of Seahawks fans are talking about the Seahawks around the clock. So all those things are great. Thank you to Lawrence for joining. And Brady, we're already getting some problems in the chat that we should probably deal with. This character, Mitch Levy, is trolling us. He says he doesn't remember okaying the use of the Mitch Unfiltered microphone for this podcast. How is that going?
He should brand it then with like a Mitch Unfiltered logo, just to make it clear what it's used for and what it's not to be used for. But Mitch, if you're listening there, I told Brian before we got on that it just wouldn't be a podcast appearance with me unless there was some sort of audio issue. So I tried to hop on my phone, couldn't hear Brian, hopped on my computer. Of course, I didn't have the right headphones for that. And so Brian was actually the one that suggested I use the Mitch Unfiltered microphone. So you can bring your complaints to him.
You know that Brady's got quality information and is a quality guy because of the crawling through glass that Mitch or myself or whoever will go through just to be able to hear his words clearly on a show. I mean, the fact that he was here promptly for an 8 a.m. show is impressive. So
yeah, how about that?
I liked that. Brady, so I opened the show talking about the significance of April 8th for the Seahawks today. What goes on? Like, what does this isn't like a full practice. Like, what's going on this week?
Yeah, they're really, it's a lot of classroom work, a lot of weight room stuff in this phase of the offseason program. So it's actually, I have never, since I've been covering them, they have not done one this early. It's usually mid-April where most teams, get to start their offseason program. Of course, when you have a new head coach, you get to do it. You get kind of a week or so head start on the rest of the NFL. So I assume that the rules are the same in terms of what you can and can't do. But this time of the year, it's a lot of classroom stuff, a lot of weight room stuff. They're probably today, I would imagine, probably just getting a lot of measurements and a lot of just baseline, just information, height, weight stuff on guys, just to be able to track them throughout the offseason. So the on-field stuff that resembles anything close to a practice, that's not going to happen for a while. I believe at some point during phase one, they can get on the field, but if they can, it's only individual stuff with trainers. It's not really football activities. That doesn't happen for another few weeks.
So is there any news that we can expect out of this? Like, and by news, it could be as simple as, oh, I didn't expect this guy to show up because it's voluntary, or this guy didn't show up and that's significant. Anything in that category or other things that you'll be paying attention to?
Well, they don't have a big, off-season contract situation to monitor this year. Like, a guy who, is going into year 4 and, like there has been in the past, seems like almost every year there's one of those, whether it was DK Metcalf a couple years ago or, Jamal Adams before that, needing an extension. So there's not really a big contract situation to monitor. And usually this is where you can kind of start to take the temperature on that situation. Like, is a guy here without the contract? Is he staying away because he doesn't have the contract? So, this 2021 was the year where they only had the 3 picks anyways, and they didn't have a first rounder. So there's just no real big contract situation to monitor. And in terms of news, yeah, I don't know. There's not a big situation that jumps out. I guess, you sort of keep an eye on guys' Instagram accounts and their Instagram stories to get an idea of whether or not they're there. And so that's what I'll be doing the next few days. But no, in terms of news, not yet.
You heard it here first, folks. Brady Henderson does his job by following Instagram accounts. He's constantly scrolling Instagram. He's just a doom scroller.
Yeah.
For Seahawks
if I'm there, I might as well get some work out of it, and I'm there.
Well, the other piece that I'm kind of curious about is what are you paying attention to this time of year? I mean, we're obviously building up to the draft. We're hearing these stories about visits, things of that nature. Is that something you're focusing on? What else is on your radar?
Yeah, definitely the visit. I mean, this is, we are kind of full swing in draft prep right now. The free agency stuff, we're kind of out of the main phases of that. Now, I think that there still is a move to be made for the Seahawks. They are going to sign a guard at some point before the draft. I would have thought that it would have happened, a week or so ago, but I still think it's going to happen here within the next week or so, or at least at some point before the draft. So there is still that, but yeah, for the most part, I'm full steam ahead on draft prep and trying to talk to different people around the league, trying to read as many mock drafts as I can, trying to stay on top of the visits and to reach out to agents that I know to see if their guys have 30 visits. You can't call them top 30 visits because Jim Nagy will yell at you for good reason. 30 visits. And I try to get those confirmed myself as much as I possibly can, or to report them as much myself as I can, just because some of the compiled lists that you see, like sometimes it's not clear if that was a 30 visit or a combine visit or a private workout. And those are all very different. So, and I think they serve different purposes for NFL teams. And so, that's on my list of things to do this week, is to really start to compile a list of those and talk to different people around the league. I've been reading mock drafts for a while. I think only now, after free agency, are when the mock drafts really start to become valuable. I mean, before, I think the value is you're just familiarizing yourself with players and generally which guys are going to go in the first round or first 2 rounds. But now it's when you can really start to pair teams and players, just because what the needs are going to be for teams going into the draft.
We'll circle back around on at least one of those visits, if not more, in a second. But I've always been curious about this. You would expect, as a amateur casual fan, that the reporters that are closest to the team, like the beat reporters that are following a specific local team, would be the first to break news about that specific team. But in almost all cases, or in a lot of cases, I wouldn't say almost all, in a lot of cases, it comes from these national reporters. The
Yeah.
news seems to get to them first. Am I right to assume that's happening because either agents or front office personnel have some sort of arrangement with these national reporters, or how do you explain that flow of information?
Yeah, it's the way I would describe it is that, obviously NFL reporting has become very specialized. And as you said, the majority of news that is, broken on a given team, I would say 85% of it, 90% of it gets broken by national reporters. And the reason is because that job at that level, like you're basically an information broker. And so, it's you're basically they're trading information, so hey, you give me information, I'll give you this information. And when you're reporting on the league at large, you're going to have more, useful information for an agent or for an executive than somebody like me who, just covers one team. And so um it's definitely a two-way street information wise at that level. And that's not to say it's impossible for beat reporters to break news. It's just when you're doing that, you have less information to give, at least on the league as a whole, because you're focused on one team. And so that's the best way to think of it is these guys, the Schefters and the Garafolos and whatnot, like they are information brokers. And, you get information by having information. And when you're covering the league on a national level, you tend to have more information.
Do you think that GMs, like front office folks, trust information they're getting from those reporters? Not that they're telling them intentionally fake information, but I would have to think there's some subterfuge going on and some reading between the lines. And it seems risky to buy in too much to what you might be hearing through that channel.
Yeah, knowing that information is going to get out, sure. Yeah, and I've been confronted with situations like that as a reporter where I get something and I have to wonder, A, would this person want me telling somebody else this information? B, is this information even reliable in the first place? And so, yeah, it is kind of, that's a good question, because it is that is something that you have to ask yourself, and something I wonder about too is, knowing that, if a reporter talks to a GM and that GM knows that reporter is going to be talking to other agents or other executives from other teams, like is he going to be shooting him straight all the time? So I guess it just comes down to relationships and, how much you trust people. When I meet like a source for the first time, I'm not going to just go turn around and report whatever they say. Like there's a vetting process involved there. And so you've got to build a rapport and kind of check some of their information before, as a reporter, before you know that you can go with it. And I imagine that that's what happens at that level too.
Well, that was the next thing I was going to ask about, is knowing that you do have sources and folks do feed you some information. How do you assess whether they're trying to use you as a mouthpiece to get some information out there? Like, hey, maybe they're trying to convince somebody that a trade might happen, or maybe they're trying to say that business is open for a trade for this player, whatever it might be, that they're trying to get something out there through you, which may not actually be true, or maybe for other purposes. How do you personally kind of go through and assess
Yeah,
that?
I mean, sometimes you know it when you see it. Sometimes it's kind of both those things are true, right? Where somebody will give you information because they want it out there, but it's still true. And so you have to assess, like, let's just, the pure hypothetical, the situation that sometimes happens with reporters. So um you might get a text from a team source saying, hey, just to give you a heads up, we're going to cut this guy later today. We plan on cutting this guy. So as a reporter, your first, the thing that should be going off in your head is, okay, so they probably are going to cut this guy, but they would like to see what they could get in a trade, if anybody is out there willing to trade for him. So what the team is thinking is, okay, if we tell this reporter that we plan on cutting this guy, he's going to put it out there. He's going to blast it out on Twitter. Then another team that's interested in that player might look at that situation and say, okay, we want that guy. We don't know if we'd be able to sign him or claim him if he gets waived. So let's make that team an offer, right? And so you see a lot of times where there's a report that a guy's going to get released or waived, and then it turns out that he ends up getting traded. And usually those trades are for, next to nothing, like conditional picks or whatever, or just another player who's going to get cut. So as a reporter, what you want to do there is, realize the situation and then word your tweet accordingly. So you would word that tweet as, the team plans on cutting this player. That way you leave yourself the wiggle room. If they end up trading him, then, you can still say, yeah, I wasn't wrong. They did plan on trading him, but then they got an offer for a trade. So, or they did plan on cutting him, but then some team came in with an offer. So the more you've been through situations like that, the more you realize there also are situations where somebody will tell you something and you kind of sense as a reporter, like, yeah, somebody has an agenda. This information is not all that reliable, or it's unfair, and I'm not going to do anything with that other than just keep it in my back pocket.
What's the most surprising thing that's happened for the Seahawks this offseason in your mind? This can go all the way back to, I guess I'll throw out Pete Carroll news. So let's go post the Pete Carroll news. What's the most surprising thing that's happened? Knowing all the things that all the people you talk to, what's something that you didn't expect to happen that did happen?
Oh, that's a good one. The most surprising. There hasn't really been, a big surprising situation. I mean, you and I were not fooled by the Ryan Grubb hire. We did not buy it when he told a group of Alabama boosters that, yeah, I'm the Alabama OC. Like, I did not. I think we were on the same page there, knowing that was not a firm commitment to being Alabama's OC. So that one, maybe the big surprise is that story broke at Dino's of all places.
You double commenter, yes.
Yeah, good for him. No, there really hasn't been a big surprise. I mean, just some minor ones, like I'm surprised that they weren't in on Jordan Brooks at $8 million and change or whatever it was that he got per year. I would have thought they would have been squarely in the mix for that. But no, there's really, I mean, the Howell trade, I didn't necessarily see that coming. But once once Drew Lock signed elsewhere, then it seemed like, they were going to have to get some other quarterback in there to back up Geno Smith. And so knowing that they don't seem sold long-term on Geno Smith, then trading for a young quarterback like that makes sense. I do think there's a bunch of fascinating Sam Howell conversation to be had, but there hasn't really been I don't know. How about for you? What's been the big one for you?
I think, I don't know if it's surprise. I mean, the thing that I wasn't sure that was going to happen that I'm most happy did was the Mike Macdonald hire. That felt like, for a lot of reasons, a challenge to make happen, and a challenge to know whether John Schneider would want a defensive coach and that they'd wait for him and all that, and that he'd want to come out to the West Coast and all those things. That worked out is probably the biggest surprise, and for my money, the biggest positive in this offseason by a long shot. And I love the pairing with him and Grubb, and I love Huff as well. I just think that was just such a tidal wave of goodness for the Seahawks to start. And who knows, maybe my tune will change a year or two into this. But given the options, I think that was just a really, really positive start. I think the thing that has been a little surprising to me, I guess, surprise is a strong word, but of note, is the types of contracts and the types of players that they've signed this offseason. And that's one of the things I was going to ask you about. They have this propensity for signing these one-year deals. And the weird thing about doing that is it eats up a ton of cap room, because you can't prorate a one-year deal over multiple years. You take it all that year, and you're not really committing to the guy. You're going to have to re-sign them the next year if you want them. So you're not really, you kind of fill in a hole, and you're setting yourself up to do this all over again the following year. And they seem to do this year after year. And so it doesn't feel like an efficient use of cap space. It doesn't feel like a great way to build a roster that's building towards something. And yet they use it extensively. And that would actually link to the other thing I'd bring up for you is the Matt Thomas news was a bit of a surprise. And the new Joey Lane coming in as VP of Football Administration. So, yeah, I'm curious. Do you have Schneider's talked about this a little bit. Do you have a point of view, or have you heard from others about these one-year contracts? Do you think Joey Lane could be a reason that might change? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the word from Schneider when we talked to him at the owners' meetings was that was not by design. That was really just what the market was, and that's what these guys were getting offered elsewhere. And so, you tend, I think how it works is you just tend to kind of have to compete with whatever other offer is out there. And so, sometimes players want the shorter term deals if they're coming off kind of a down season, and they would rather take the short term deal. And some of these are 2-year deals too. So that it's, Rayshawn Jenkins was 2 years, Noah Fant 2 years. So I think that's what he meant by the 2-year deals. And in terms of the 1-year deals, yeah, I think it is cases of guys, just trying to recoup their value, and guys, in Farrell Brown's case, I think he's a little bit older, and so I think that kind of explains that. The bigger picture question is, are they any better? If you look at the individual moves that they made, there's not one there where, say, it's they cut a guy or lost a guy in free agency and they replaced him with somebody else. There isn't really one of those moves where I say, yeah, they're way better off. Now, in some spot, like at linebacker, I think inside linebacker, they're going to be faster. Does that make them better? I don't know. I mean, Rayshawn Jenkins, if you just look at him versus Quandre Diggs, respective careers, Quandre Diggs has easily had the more successful career. He's been the better ball hawk. So it's hard to say, he's got Pro Bowls on his resume. It's hard to say that they got better by going from Diggs to Rayshawn Jenkins. Certainly the theme across the board is, in their minds, at least, there's better value. What they're paying Rayshawn Jenkins, 2 years, $12 million, basically the same deal they gave Julian Love last March. Hard to say if they're going to be better with him there, but they're going to be cheaper. And maybe if you get a comparable player there for less money, then okay, we'll see if he's better, but he's certainly a better value. So that's, to me, kind of been the theme of their moves. Like, it's hard to look at this team right now. Obviously, there's still the draft. There's still, the rest of the offseason to acquire talent. But it's hard to look at them and say they are, markedly better than they were last year. And to me, you would never hear anybody from the team say this, but when you cut Jamal Adams, and they were going to do that regardless, but the decision to cut him and not designate him a post June 1 release, meaning you take all $20 million in dead money this season, to me, that kind of sets the tone. Like this is the, when you're taking a $20 million dead cap hit on a player, that's tough. Like, that's hard to build your roster around that. And so I just kind of wonder if this is really a reset season for them, and a season where they try to get their cap in order. They pay for, they pay off some of the cap debts with Diggs and with Jamal Adams, and they really try to truly go for it next season. When you're going to have another draft class under your belt, you're going to be 1 year into the Mike Macdonald defense and the Mike Macdonald system and all that. I don't know. I mean, I could be off base in that assessment, but it just seems like when you're dealing with $30 million in dead money between two players, that's tough. Now, the flip side of that is 2 years ago, they did that with Russell Wilson and Bobby Wagner. I think Russell Wilson's dead cap hit was $26 million, and they had some with Wagner as well. And the way they did that was they nailed their draft class. The difference is that, that one had a top 10 pick, and a ton of early round draft capital because of the Wilson trade. This one, you have less of that. It's less of a chance, I think, to really nail your draft class.
Do we know where Matt Thomas went? Sounds like he took a job elsewhere.
No. So you're judging that based off of what Schneider said, right? Where he had an opportunity to go somewhere else.
Yes.
Yeah. So I believe that he was talking about Joey Lane, who had an opportunity to go somewhere else. Yeah. I don't.
See.
Yeah, I could be wrong about that, but the impression I've gotten with Matt Thomas is that both sides just decided it was time. And he had kind of been thinking about retirement for a few years. Yeah. And so, and I think you heard Schneider on the radio interview talk about how they'd been talking with him about a succession plan for a while. So I think this had been in the works for a while. I don't think it was, Matt Thomas got another job elsewhere.
News came out about a visit with Bo Nix. I
Yeah.
think yesterday. Seahawks made the trade for Sam Howell. They could have walked away from Geno Smith, which, by the way, if you really were resetting, is kind of questionable why you wouldn't free up that contract. So I have some questions there. But let's say you got Geno Smith, you got Sam Howell. Sam Howell's 23 years old. He's younger than Bo Nix.
Mm-hmm.
You traded away some decent draft capital, not a third round pick the way some people are talking about it, but
Right.
the equivalent of like a fifth round pick. But you still moved out of one of your picks out of the third round. What do you read into the Bo Nix visit?
I don't think it's a sign that they're looking to trade up. In fact, I think that was part of the calculus in trading for Sam Howell. Was you realize that without a second round pick, that your ability to move up from 16 is somewhat limited, because it's not just like you can look at the chart and say, okay, they have this, they could give up this to move up 6 spots. Remember, you're also competing with the other teams that want to move up, and you're competing likely with the 3 teams ahead of you that all need a quarterback, that are picking in 10, 11, 12. So I think they felt like they didn't have the juice to move up in the draft, and they felt like at 16, without a second round pick, they were sort of limited in terms of their ability to take a quarterback, or unless it was going to be a late late round guy. And so they made the Howell trade. I think this is a case of due diligence, and in the event that for whatever reason Bo Nix falls somewhere in the second round, obviously they don't have one of those picks now, but if you trade back from 16, you could potentially pick one of those up. So to me, it just goes back to the Schneider example, 2005 with Aaron Rodgers. Remember, he was supposed to be the number 1 overall pick, or there was a lot of buzz about that. Ended up falling to 24, and Green Bay snagged him. So I think that experience is very much stuck with John Schneider over the years. And, they want to be prepared in the event that a guy unexpectedly falls. And, there was a time this offseason where, people were talking about Bo Nix as a second round guy. And then it's only more recently that now you hear all the talk about, some team taking him in the first round or trading up to get him or whatever. And so I think they're just accounting for the possibility that, maybe he unexpectedly falls. And there is, when you bring these guys in for visits, you also get to talk to them about other players that, they played with, and you get some intel that way. And so I think it's more, in the event that he drops, much more so than, they're going to take him at 16 or trade up from 16, especially to get him.
Yeah, we were discussing yesterday on a draft roundtable that we were having that the other possibility is that Bo Nix isn't moving up the way some people are saying. In fact, he might be sliding, and maybe he could be someone who's available in the third round, and the Seahawks are kicking the tires there. For my money, that I see Bo Nix as a third round pick. I don't see him as a first round pick, but I don't make these decisions. So I would be very concerned if the Seahawks spent a first round pick on him. 2 questions there for you, Brady. One is just the quarterback position in this draft. There's been some. Rob Rang, I had him on Friday. He said, I think that Michael Penix would be a dream scenario if he falls. I don't think he said, I don't think he's going to follow the Seahawks at 16. He thinks he's going to go before the Seahawks even pick at 16. But if he was there, would be a dream scenario. He's not suggesting that would happen, but kind of thinks it might if he's available. You just talked about Bo Nix. We just talked about Sam Howell. Do you think the Seahawks are going into this draft looking to add a quarterback? And I'd add one more little wrinkle there, which is what you'd said before. If they're kind of setting up for after Geno and building towards something, are they just all in on Howell, or do you think that they would potentially hedge their bets here in the draft?
Yeah, I just have a hard time. I think that they are going to try to get a quarterback at some point. Try being the operative word here. And I think they've gone into drafts several times over the last 14 years, not necessarily with the intention of taking a quarterback, but with a thought that, it would be nice to have another young guy in the pipeline. And for whatever reason, we've seen them continually pass on that in the draft. And we all know the number, only 2 over 14 years. And so it's hard, to imagine that you go that long and pass over quarterbacks in the draft that many times. And then now you're going to take one in the first round when you just traded for Sam Howell, when you still have Geno. on a reasonable deal for at least one more year. So I don't know. I never say never. I think with Penix, from what I've heard, the medical stuff is not maybe as big of a concern as it seemed like it could be. There's a lot of scuttlebutt that's really going to kill him in the draft. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, it's there. The injury history is there, but it sounds like it's not something that is just going to, get teams to totally move him way down or to take him off their board completely. And so, the delivery is another thing. I think some teams aren't wild about that from what I've heard. And there's just the other questions that every quarterback faces, how, about reading defenses and all that stuff. And so I don't know specifically what the majority opinion in that front office is on Seattle. I just know their history, and their history tells me that it's hard to imagine them pulling that trigger at 16. And I think that would be another case where, yeah, maybe if the guy falls, then maybe you consider it more. But with Howell there, and still with another year, realistically, probably one more year of Geno, there doesn't seem like there'd be that urgency to fill that spot in round one.
Okay. On the spot, I was going to say gun to the head, but I'm trying to find some way that is not as threatening. But if I asked you right now, who is going to be the Seahawks starting quarterback next season? 2025. Who would you put your money on?
Well, I mean, I got to go with Sam Howell right now, just because my gut tells me it's not going to be Geno. And if it's not Geno, then, maybe you could say Sam Howell or the field. And I would probably go, if it's Geno, Sam Howell, or the field, gun to my head, or whatever euphemism you want to say, I would, either Howell or the field.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's assuming Geno's gone next year because of the contract. I wonder, I mean, if he has a great year this year, what's keeping them from extending him and spreading that cap out? And I think your bet makes sense given the fact that Schneider has had every opportunity to kind of make it a non-story around Geno, but he has turned it into a story at every turn, and does not, no matter what he says, does not seem like he is a guy that is excited to have Geno at the front of the ship for much longer. Without that, I would be like, if the guy has a great year this year, they just have an easy way to extend him, and they probably get him at a better deal than most other starting quarterbacks in the NFL, better than he will play. A better deal than he will play and will warrant. So, but yeah, that feels interesting. And so if this is Geno's ultimate year in Seattle, is there any reason to believe that he could create, I mean, he would still have time on his contract. Will he have any trade value should the team decide to move on from him? Like, imagine he has a really good year this year. Let's paint the best case scenario.
Well, it'd be tough. I mean, it would have been easier this year, I think,
right?
Even though he would have been coming off a less productive year, just because of the way the contract was this year. I mean, if the contract now, like next year, I think he's set to make, what is it, $25 million in cash right now. But then the contract, the cap number is a lot bigger than that, just because of the bonus proration. Yeah, and then they, they did the restructure which pushed some of the cap charges in next season. So as I pull it up right now, it looks like he'd be set to make $25 million in cash next year. But as of right now, the cap number is $38.5 million. And remember, he's got the escalators in his contract. So where if he, hits certain benchmarks, he'd be in line to make, several $1 million more. So, now that cap number could be $40+ million. So it creates this interesting scenario where, Geno Smith could play a little bit better this season than he did last season. And that might actually hurt his chances of sticking around because, he would have, he'd hit some of those escalators. And so, you'd be looking at a $40+ million cap hit. To your point, they could also, extend him to bring some of that down. But then, I just don't know. As you've said, I've gotten the same sense from them that they're just not they're not sold on him. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
there were Pete Carroll guys and John Schneider guys. I think generally for 14 years, those guys were very much in alignment, but there were, I think, certain players and certain decisions that were more one versus the other. And I just think Pete Carroll was way more sold on Geno than John Schneider is. And, Mike McDonald doesn't have any allegiance to Geno Smith. And so it's for all intents and purposes, a new regime in that sense. And they just don't have the same, I just haven't gotten the sense that they have the same affinity for Geno that Pete Carroll did. And so I think this is very much a make or break year for Geno.
A few more questions for you, Brady. Tavondre Sweat yesterday, defensive tackle prospect, 366-pound plus dude, was reported to be arrested for DWI in Texas. And this is a guy who, according to Dame Brugler, also had been telling teams, yes, he had been a partier earlier in his college career, but has started to get that under control. So just seems like evidence to the contrary.
Yeah.
One, are you hearing anything about whether the Seahawks have any interest in a guy like that? Two, if not, what do you think that kind of news does to a prospect who is largely pegged to be somewhere probably in day two, early day two?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think their history shows that offense is not necessarily a deal breaker. I believe Jaron Reed had a DUI arrest in college, and they drafted him in the second round. So here, and this is also, I should say, an organization that is going to look at every single detail. So they're going to wait for the details to come out. And what was the blood alcohol level? What was the interaction like with police? What is his history like? Is this really his first slip up, or is this a pattern of behavior? Kind of like it was, and I know Jalen Carter was alleged to have done different things, but there was a pattern of behavior there. It wasn't like a one-time thing. And so I think they'll wait for a lot of the information to come out. Unfortunately for everybody involved, the timing is kind of difficult because, it's 2 weeks and 3 days before the start of the first round. And so the timing is difficult there, but I think they're going to view all of this. They're going to take everything into account. And you can't just say right now that, yeah, he got arrested on suspicion of DUI, so he's out of the picture. I mean, they would have considered Jalen Carter at 20 last year. So it wasn't like all the stuff there, took him completely off their board. At some point, like a guy falls far enough in the draft where, okay, then you're a little bit more willing to take that risk with, the lower signing bonus. And at some point there's just enough value there to take the gamble on. Like if you're getting arguably a first round talent, if he falls to the late second round, then, there's enough value there for a team like the Seahawks or anybody to feel like it's a worthwhile risk.
You were the first person I saw to report the Seahawks had interest in Jonathan Hankins. They ended up signing him. You're the first person I saw report the Seahawks might be interested or bring in someone like Laken Tomlinson, Cody Whitehair. Now we've seen Greg Van Roten come in. Anything else that you're hearing or around the Seahawks that might not be clear that they could still be in the planning phases to do?
The one that I know of right now is the guard one, and I do think they are going to sign one of those three players. Excuse me. I've gotten the sense that Tomlinson and Whitehair are more of like the primary options, and that Van Roten, he seems to me like he would be more of a fallback option, like somebody you would sign to a minimum salary deal or something close to it. I don't think any of these guys would be looking at a big contract from the Seahawks. I think it would be a 1-year deal, for a couple million, something like that. But I have gotten the sense that Tomlinson and Whitehair would be the primary options. And I think they just view them as similar caliber players. Both have a Pro Bowl on their resume, both in their early 30s. They are different players in the sense that, Tomlinson has only been a left guard basically throughout his career. He also has a remarkable streak of durability. He is some kind of Iron Man, only one missed game over 9 seasons. I think he's only missed 9 combined snaps over the last 5 seasons, which is insane for any player, let alone an offensive lineman. But he would be a left guard and a left guard only, whereas Whitehair has played all throughout the interior. He actually made a Pro Bowl as a center, I think, in 2018, and he's mostly played left guard since then, but I think he's played both guard spots. And so, and he actually had a pretty high grade in pass block win rate last season. I think he was 6th. And if you look at the 3-year trend, I think he's still in the top 10. He's like 9 or something over the last 3 years in pass block win rate as a guard there. And so, again, I think it's going to be one of those two guys, but they are still keeping their eye on Van Roten, and they had him in for a visit as well. I know they had Tomlinson in for a visit, and I know they've been trying to schedule Whitehair for a visit. I don't know if that's happened yet, but I know that they did have it on the books, and then some scheduling stuff got in the way, and they had to reschedule it, and I don't know if they've done that yet.
Do you think that there's anything that will happen after the draft? Like, are there veterans that they might be looking at? Do you buy into this Jamal Adams thing at all? Anything there?
With Adams, yeah, the sense I've gotten from talking to somebody there is that it's something they haven't closed the door on, but that would be a down the road type move. Like, you get the linebackers you signed on the field, see how they're looking in OTAs, see if there's an injury that pops up maybe, and then you consider it. But I haven't gotten the sense that they were talking contract at all or anything like that, and that anything was imminent. I think that would just be a case where you see what you've got, you assess from there, and then if he's still out there available for, a low risk, next to nothing kind of deal, then you bring him in. But it's not something that they're planning on doing right now.
John Schneider's never taken a guard before the 3rd round, like a true guard. He's taken tackles that have ended up playing guard. He's taken centers that have ended up playing other positions like Ethan Posick, but never taken a true guard before the 3rd round. That's their biggest need. You could argue center is still a question mark with Oluwatimi never being a full starter, 5th round pick. Not exactly someone you give a starting job, and Nick Harris as a veteran option. Do you think, and I'll add one more thing in there, Schneider's never taken a defensive tackle in the 1st round in his entire draft history. Those happen to be 2 of the strongest positions in this draft, and there's some 1st round options that are often mocked to the Seahawks. Schneider's also said multiple times in the press this offseason that he thinks guards or an interior offensive lineman are overpaid and overdrafted. What do you think is going to end up being right? That all these mocks that have him taking Troy Fontenot or Cody Barton or someone, so not Cody Barton, Graham Barton. Knew I was going to make that mistake at some point in the 1st round, or Schneider returning to his tendencies and not really drafting that position till later?
I think if you're putting money on it, you would have to say it's a trade back situation, and that they then, take somebody like Cooper Beebe. That's Kansas State, right?
Cooper Beebe would be like a 2nd round, 3rd round kind of prospect.
Right. So you trade back and then you pick up a 2nd round pick and take somebody like that in the 2nd round. I don't know, but if Troy Fontenot is there at 16, and if he is as good as some people, people talk about Hall of Fame type potential, all pro type potential with him, which is a little much to be putting on a guy who hasn't played an NFL snap yet. But I don't know, if you think that guy is that legit, I could see it happening at 16. I think there's also, it takes 2 to make a trade. There's been a lot of picks that they've made where I think they only made that pick there because they couldn't find a trade back. Even going back to last April, remember they had gone into that thinking, okay, there's only 2 players that if they fall to number 5, and I think the quarterbacks weren't involved in this because they figured those guys would have been gone by then. But remember, John Schneider said after the draft, there was only 2 guys that they would have stayed put for to take at 5 if those guys had fallen. Obviously, Witherspoon was one of them. The other one was Will Anderson Jr. But even then, you saw them take all the time. The clock basically ran down on them because Schneider was, I think, exhausting every trade possibility, thinking, okay, is there any way to trade back and still get Devin Witherspoon? So it's a team very much in tuned with the idea of maximizing value in the draft. And so with no 2nd round pick, Yeah, I think the best bet is a trade back and then take a guard either later in the first round or in the second round. But on the flip side of that, at 16, you are kind of in that spot in the draft where you are still probably going to get a first round talent there. Whereas, when you're picking in the mid 20s, such a big part of the motivation for them in trading back is at that point, you're probably looking at a second round talent. And there's, in their minds, not a huge difference between a guy you could take at 25 versus a guy you could take at 35. And that's been, I think, one of the big driving forces in their decision to trade back when they're in the 20s all those times over the years.
Brady Henderson from ESPN with us. And the most common way to add a pick is to trade back, right? And that's what you were just talking about. Another way that you can add picks is trading away players. And I'm curious, there's been some conversation among fans, at least, around DK Metcalf. Is this a situation where they'll look to reset their roster a little bit there and see if they can get something for DK? There are folks, I will say, have talked about, does it make sense for Tariq Woolen to be somebody that they might move to pull in a second round pick if he's not a good fit for what Mike McDonald wants to do and still has a lot of value? Do you see any player trade potentials here that could result in any picks, let alone, let's say, top of the draft kind of guys?
Yeah, I mean, those are probably the two that you would just start the conversation with, just knowing that they are two of your more tradable assets. And I think with DK, I mean, I've heard the conversation. I was golfing with Mike Salk last Friday, and we had this conversation on the golf course where I tried to tell him I just don't see it happening. I think Mike has been one of the leading voices in the conversation about how this is something that the Seahawks should consider. I think with DK, I mean, it doesn't fit the profile of the reasons why you typically see big name players get traded. It's usually either the guy's up for a contract and the two sides are way far apart. The guy is making a lot of money and the production is not there, or the guys become such a problem inside the building that you've got to move on. I mean, yeah, they weren't thrilled with the penalty stuff last season and some of the defiance he showed after that, but I don't think that has nearly risen to anywhere close to the level of them feeling like they're done with this guy. He's still under contract for 2 more years, so you're not faced with another contract negotiation for a while, and the production is still there. And so I think Mike looks at it from the viewpoint of he is your most tradable asset. He would allow you to reset your roster and build it in a more conventional way. But I think the Seahawks, and I'm guessing other teams view it too, as it's not, you don't have to start building a team with the traditional building blocks of, quarterback, left tackle. Like, the way to build a team is you find as many difference makers as possible, elite players, and then you fill in the gaps from there. And so I don't think they view it as, their roster is poorly constructed. I think they view it as, DK Metcalf is a, 26-year-old Pro Bowl player who's been pretty healthy throughout his career. I think he's only missed 1 game. And he's still very productive.
All right, last question. How did you shoot on the course?
On Friday, pretty well. Yeah, I shot a 79 with a double on the first hole. Yeah, so
wow, nice.
A lot of mental fortitude to not let the double bogey ruin my round. But
Brady Henderson,
home course is a great course. If anybody has not played down there, you got to go down to home course. Love that place.
Oh, the home course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I know Mike talks about that course quite a bit. He's a fan. Definitely the best deal. Best course for the money for sure. Maybe oh my gosh, what's the one that's out?
Gold Mountain's giving it a run for
Gold Mountain. Thank you. Gold Mountain is very close. You and I played there together. So that is Brady Henderson of ESPN.com. I'm going to get him out of here so he can get those pearly whites all shined up.
Can I leave you with a story real quick?
Absolutely.
Okay. This is maybe like a good cautionary tale for when people are reading, the visits and everything. So I was told by a Seahawks source a few years ago that I won't name the player because I don't want to unfairly out the player, but I'll, maybe you can figure out who I'm talking about just with some of the details here. So there was a defensive player. This is within the last, I would say, 6-7 years. a defensive player the Seahawks brought in for a 30 visit before the draft. It was a guy who had been connected to the Seahawks, and a guy who ended up going in the first couple rounds, I believe. So there obviously was interest in the guy on the Seahawks part. They brought him in for a visit, and they left that visit totally turned off by the guy. He was, checking his phone the whole time. He was complaining about, all these visits he's got to take and all this, schedule and how tired he was. And the guy just let off an air of, cockiness of like too cool for school. This is all, such a big, it's all like totally putting him off and everything. And so they did not end up drafting him. I think the guy sort of flamed out. I think he was a second round pick, and I don't think he lasted very long in the NFL. But that is a good cautionary tale of, a 30 visit does signal interest in a player. But, the big reason you bring a guy in for a 30 visit is because you've got questions to answer about that player, whether it's medical stuff and you're hoping to, recheck him, MRI, X-ray and whatnot. Or you got a question about the personality and how he would fit into your culture and locker room. And I think in that case, they got a pretty clear answer on that player, and he wasn't a fit for them. So that's just something to keep in mind when you see, these list of 30 visits, players that the Seahawks are bringing in. That means interest. That doesn't necessarily mean a strong affinity for that player.
Helpful as always.
Now go figure. Everybody can go figure out who the player was.
I was going to ask you some questions, but I'm going to let it go there. But that's Brady Henderson of ESPN.com. You want to follow him on Twitter at Brady Henderson, all together as one word. Anything else people should be looking forward to from you, Brady? Keep an eye out for coming up.
No, we got our mock draft on ESPN coming up in a couple of weeks. I've been at ESPN since 2017, and I have not hit one of those correctly yet. So now there's been a couple years there where they didn't have first round picks, so give me a break. But I'm going to try to nail my first one this year. I like my chances a little more at 16 than I did at 26, 27, 28. But we'll see. I'm 0 for my ESPN career, so I'm hoping to get that turned around this year. But in the meantime, they're going to sign a guard, I think, at some point within the next week or so.
Well, Mitch, if he was with us, would point out that people should not bet on anything that you and I say when it comes to scores or predictions.
That's right.
That's Brady Henderson. Thank you, Brady, for joining this morning. It's great to catch up, and I hope you have a great week.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for having me, Brian. I'll talk to you later, man.
All right. Take care, man.
See you.
All right, that was Brady Henderson, and great to have him on the show. One of my favorites, for my money, the best beat reporter for the Seahawks, generally to speak of. I just trust his reporting more than I trust pretty much anyone else's. And part of it is with Brady, he's someone who I know vets the information he gets and actually checks it with multiple sources. He does what a professional reporter is supposed to do, as opposed to just passing on information as fast as possible to get the most clicks possible. And so when Brady reports something, I generally take it as pretty good information. I also think he's a smart guy. He's a good writer, and Seattle Northwest guy. So all those things are pros. He and my other favorite beat reporter, Michael Sean Dugar, who was on the show Real Hawk Talk last Wednesday, we've been really fortunate to have both of those guys on. Got a couple more minutes this morning. I'm going to offer, if anyone is a club level or suite level member on YouTube, I'm happy to take questions for a few minutes. So if anyone in chat is a club level or suite level YouTube member, feel free to post a question in chat. I'll respond to it. If you want to be a club level or suite level YouTube member, all you got to do is click the link that is pinned to the chat, or look in the description in the video itself. You'll find a link, click on it, join, and pick club level or suite level, and you'll be a YouTube member. And you get a little emblem next to your name. We had someone join already, and would be happy to give folks a little bit extra just for joining as a YouTube member. And the Hawks Nets level, you get an emblem next to your name, you get access to the custom emojis, all that stuff. we try to give a little bit extra for the folks that are giving us a little bit extra. So if anyone's club level or suite level has a question, let me know. Otherwise, we will see what's going on. Guest wise, we're going to slow down a bit because there's some stuff I want to get into in detail that might change people that I desperately want to talk to. But we've had an all-star crew of guests. I know Mitch wants to come back on, so we might have to find ways to make that happen. Certainly enjoy that conversation. I am also going on a little bit of a trip this week. So at least for the next 2 mornings, I'm bringing the show on the road and going to be a little bit at the whim of the internet connection of wherever I am. So hopefully that all works. I'm going to bring all the equipment, so all that should work. But just heads up, timing might be a little bit variable depending on when my kids are awake or asleep and where I can go to try to do the show without waking up the whole house. But I do plan on doing a show every day all the way up into draft. And so far we are 15 days in a row of doing that. Hopefully folks are enjoying. Best way to support this, if you want to keep seeing this much content, or at least something close to this much content, please give the show a like, click subscribe, go to patreon.com/HawkBlogger, sign up now, get access to the Slack channel, get access to the audio versions of all these podcasts. And as I said before, click on the link to join as a YouTube member. All those are great ways to support the show. We're over 9,500 subscribers on YouTube. I would love to get that up to 10,000 as fast as possible. We are growing quite quickly. I'd love to see that hit that milestone. That would be great to see. All right. Did not see any questions come in from either club level or suite level. That's fine. Feel free, if you'd like, to post those questions. I think in the community section, you should be able to do that. And I'll take a look at those. Otherwise, if you're a patron, be sure to look out for Wednesday, where we always take questions for the crew each Wednesday night from the Slack channel. You got to be a Patreon member to do that, and we go through that with the crew. On that note, if you've missed anything recently, I highly recommend checking out the show. The last 2 shows I did yesterday was the first draft roundtable with Rob Staten, with C. Mike Spinmove, Griffin Sturgeon, and with Jeff Simmons. That was yesterday. Good show, a lot of good content around the draft, went through a lot of different prospects. And then Saturday's show, we went through, Jeff and I, and did a defense-only mock draft and looked at what it would mean to draft only defense. And I thought that was revealing as well. Pretty soon, I am going to figure out how I want to approach the interior offensive line. We went deep on defensive line, defensive tackle, and on linebacker. I want to do that with interior offensive line. I want to do a little bit of film study as we do that. I'm trying to figure out how to do that without causing all sorts of copyright issues, but appreciate people's patience as I figure out how to get that done. I see a question here from Lewis, who says he sometimes has a problem finding the Real Hawk Talk link on Wednesdays. Not sure what you're referring to. If you're talking about in Slack, let me know. Otherwise, if you're a patron, you can always send me a note on patreon.com/HawkBlogger, and I can try to get you squared away with any questions there. Otherwise, folks, thank you for joining this morning. Have a great week. Have a great Monday to start your week. And if you're interested in the eclipse, hopefully you get to see it. Although I'm looking outside, it's pouring rain and probably going to be cloudy. So welcome to the Northwest. So be it. All right. Take care, everybody. And I will see you all tomorrow.